Hello everyone. Today we shall look into the second language acquisition theory, made easy just for you. The second language acquisition theory. Since 1970, several experiments in the field of SLA have been conducted involving adults and children learning second languages. Experts like Krashen, Dulay, Burt, and Terrell have had convincing evidences to show that a second language can be acquired like the mother tongue if similar conditions are provided in the classroom. So, the SLA experiments have put forward the following hypothesis in support of the theory. Fine. Now we shall look into what are all the hypotheses that supported this particular theory. They are learning acquisition hypothesis, natural order hypothesis, monitor hypothesis, input hypothesis, and affective filter hypothesis. So these are all the 5 hypotheses that supported this theory. Now we shall look into the learning acquisition hypothesis. This hypothesis states that an adult has 2 distinct ways of learning a second language. They are subconscious acquisition and conscious learning. And these two are interrelated in a definite manner. Of these two, acquisition is more important and it requires a meaningful interaction in the language concerned. When the learner's attention is not on the form but on the message conveyed, then you will call it as an acquisition. And when you look into the error correction and the grammar do not seem to help the acquisition process, but they may help the learning process instead. To make it clear, I would like to differentiate these two in the manner acquisition will focus on informal teaching, whereas learning definitely needs a formal teaching. And the acquisition will need an implicit knowledge, which means you will learn the language indirectly. And the learning part, it needs an explicit knowledge, which means you will have a thorough, clear understanding about a concept. And the acquisition, you will pick up a language subconsciously, whereas in learning, you will know about a language consciously. And the acquisition is similar to a child's first language acquisition, where your mom keeps on helping you, keeps on pushing you towards a language, and you will learn the language in a very easy manner. Whereas in learning, you should have a formal knowledge of a language. Now we shall look into the natural order hypothesis. This hypothesis states that grammatical structures are acquired in a particular order. Note this, it is important, it is acquired and not learnt. Certain structures are acquired early while certain others are acquired late. I have told you the differences between the acquisition and learning process, and natural order is always supported by acquisition. And it doesn't state that every acquirer will acquire them in the same exact order. Okay, so the grammatical structures will be acquired, but it would differ from a person to another. For example, it has been found that progressive markers like ing and plural markers like adding s are acquired early than the possessive markers and the third person markers. For example, the words talking, walking, singing, all those will be acquired early. For example, potato. And the plural form of potato is potatoes. All those things will be acquired early. Whereas the third person markers and the possessive markers, this is his pen. All those things will be acquired late. Okay. So this is natural order hypothesis, and acquisition is much important for this particular natural order hypothesis, whether it is a first language acquisition or a second language acquisition, whether it is to a child or it is to an adult, everything will be happening only through natural order hypothesis. Okay. Now we shall look into the monitor hypothesis. This hypothesis states that conscious learning in adults helps in creating a mechanism called monitor or editor. What it does is it checks and makes the necessary grammatical correction in the acquirer's utterances whenever necessary. So the use of monitor is possible only when the acquirer focuses on language form and knows the grammatical rules and has enough time to monitor. So I am talking about the conscious learning of adults. They would definitely have the basic language form and they would know the grammatical rules so that they would have the potential to correct their mistakes. For example, when the acquirer is writing rather than speaking, these conditions exist. Why? Because when you are speaking, you are having a spontaneous process and you would not have any time to look into your mistakes. Whereas when you are writing, you will have enough time to look into your errors and correct them immediately, and that would be because of your own initiative and none need to help you to correct your mistakes. And it is almost like a spelling and grammar checker in a word processor in a computer. How in a computer you will have an underline, red underline of to correct your mistakes. Same way you would have a natural ability to correct your mistakes when you know the language rules and when you know the grammatical rules. It is of course easy to monitor your mistakes and correct them immediately on your own initiative. Okay. Now we shall look into the input hypothesis. This hypothesis states that in order to be understood what the teacher presents in the class, it should be comprehensible to the learners and it should be challenging enough. For when it is challenging enough, it should not be too challenging or not less challenging. It is important to note that acquisition is possible only if the learner comprehends what is said to him. So the teacher of a second language classroom should make sure that language presented to him is understandable and a little beyond his level. Which is comprehensible is it should be understandable and it should be little beyond his level. So what this states is it calls it as I plus 1 level. That is, I is the present level of the learner and I plus 1 is the level of the language presented to him a bit beyond his level. So this is the input hypothesis. So it should be focused on comprehensible and it should be challenging enough, which is a little beyond his level. Okay. Now we shall look into the affective filter hypothesis. This hypothesis states that learners acquire language only when they are willing to acquire. That is, when they are not suffering from any mental worries such as anxiety, tension, fear of failure and many. Factors like examinations, competitions, threats of parents, punishment of teachers are negative conditions and they do not help acquisition. On the other hand, encouragement, appreciation and praise are all the positive conditions and those positive conditions will help a lot in the acquisition process. So the teacher should try to create a positive climate for the learners to feel free from tension and fear. So most of the parents, what they do is, in their enthusiasm in making their child get good marks, they keep on forcing them to read and they keep them under threat. So that should be avoided and it doesn't help according to the experts. An acquisition-rich environment is one where the learners have absolute freedom to do what suits them and where the teacher is more a friend, guide and a counselor rather than a master. So the teacher should never be a master. She should be a friend, guide and a counselor. In such an environment, learners are encouraged to get more and more comprehensible input and they interact with the teacher and other learners so that the condition would be favorite and to learn a second language. This is much important. So we looked into all the 5 hypotheses that supported the second language acquisition theory. So based on that, we shall have several MCQs to boost your memory. First one, which hypothesis talks about I plus 1 level in the second language acquisition theory? Option A, input hypothesis. Option B, natural order hypothesis. Option C, monitor hypothesis. Option D, learner hypothesis. So you have guessed it right. The answer for the first question is option A, input hypothesis. So the second question for you is, what are the characteristics of acquisition? Option A, subconscious learning. Option B, implicit knowledge. Option C, non-formal teaching. Option D, all of the above. You have guessed it right. So the answer for the second question is option D, all of the above. Thank you.